Okay, so this is group one. Are we group one?
I did see Group One somewhere, so yeah, I believe so. Yes.
All right, cool. So this is all two of us. Uh, I'm Kevin Cronin,
Greg Allen.
and so I guess we're off to go. All right. So the first professor question that we got was, what is social constructionism? What are some of the elements that came together to give rise to adolescence as it is socially constructed?
Yeah, so I guess my response to that question is that social constructionism, at least as far as the video explained and as far as my understanding of it, is how we create meaning through social interaction with others. My interpretation of that definition is kind of, as a society, there's certain things that we accept and certain things that we understand as a group that develop a certain meaning and construction. One of the things that the video showed and talked about was the idea of the thumbs up symbol, how that in our culture and in our society, that means universally good job. And that's something that as a society we've accepted. And nobody's going to try to change that or argue that because, that's just kind of the way that it is. Um, and then kind of to the second part of the question is, what has contributed to um, what has given rise to adolescence with social constructionism? I would say technology is a big piece of that. Being able to go onto social media and see different trends, and as a society within the internet, and in the internet world, we're able to pick up on those trends, develop those trends, and it really creates a whole new level to the understanding of society. Just based off of things that we see on social media and on the internet.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't even really think about it in terms of like the sort of technological aspect. Like, yeah, I mean, like just sort of continuing what you just sort of said in terms of like what social constructionism is. Yeah, like what I got out of the video was that like a good portion of things, like sort of culturally and things of that nature, are socially constructed. Like, I mean, in essence, you could like I think that they were saying language was socially constructed.
Yep.
So like I mean, because that's obviously like different places have different languages and things of that nature. But like just like letters, like they're all like really abstract sort of concepts. Like they
Right.
don't have.
Just kind of a combination of shapes.
Yeah, exactly. And like they don't really have any meaning unless as a society you sort of put meaning to them. And that was sort of like one of the things that I got out of that video. Um just like yeah, so basically like social construction is kind of almost like a unwritten agreement between like the society that you're in kind of. Um and then continuing with the rest of that question. So like going basing it off of like a I guess like a historic and like psychological aspect of it because I know like I remember I was in a psych class as an undergrad and I believe that they were saying that like adolescence didn't come into fruition until somewhere in like the 1800s. Um, so like once civilization started to become like sort of more industrialized and stuff.
Right.
Um, and like so like that was when like they had kids working like a ridiculous amount of hours like in factories and things of that nature. um so like I guess the term adolescence wouldn't have really been something that was like thought of then because they would just send their kids out to work in a factory.
Right.
um and then yeah, and then all those laws were passed where which like banned that kind of practice and things of that nature. But so yeah, I mean, I can't remember like I feel like one of the one of the videos like gave us like an actual date range of when like adolescence was sort of put into effect in a sense, I guess.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it said like early 1900s.
yeah, 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 and that was like I guess just like when we started actually like caring about the welfare of our kids, we started to actually like look more in depth into the actual period from I can't remember what age it starts at and what age it ends at, but yeah, we started like paying more attention to it in that sort of a sense. And
Yeah, going off of that for just a second, I mean, one thing that I was really intrigued by through the videos and the readings is like realizing the entire history behind adolescence and how everything is ultimately connected.
mhm,
It seems like one thing has led to the next, which ultimately leads to this general development and this general growing and general understanding of different concepts and ideas that psychologists and researchers have used to um, come up with studies and findings.
yeah. All right. So
And we can move on to the next one here.
yeah, I was about to say, is there anything we should add to that? I don't know if there is, but okay, yeah. So question two is, how do you think the experience of adolescence will change in the coming years? Will it be better or worse for youth?
hmm So, I struggled with this question for a little while, as it's a little more gives a little more room for opinion.
Mm,
And ultimately, I think that moving forward, the experience of adolescence will be a little better. I think that with new technologies available that can develop new studies, I think it will be easier for parents to access those studies and then help. Those studies can help the parents raise their kids in a more effective manner so that the teenagers are getting a better understanding from their parents, where as we saw in the documentary and as I know from some personal experience and you might well know as well, it can be hard for parents at times, but I think with new technologies and new studies and new findings coming out, um, and this rapidly developing idea of adolescence and the adolescent brain, I think parents will then be able to have a better understanding of how their teenagers are functioning, and that will ultimately lead to more effective parenting. Um, where I argue that idea that it will be better, I do think that there are some technologies, especially within the internet and social media, that can hinder the experience of an adolescent in the sense that there's less actual social interaction and
mm,
more, um, just connecting over the internet. So, people aren't actually together. There's less playtime. I know that there's studies that have showed that social media causes anxiety, especially in teenagers. Um, and there's just this constant attachment to the social media and the social media world. And I do think that that could lead to some negative experiences for adolescents. But ultimately, I think moving forward, as more studies and more findings come out, the experience will be better for adolescents.
yeah. Well, yeah. Going off of like your aspect of like what could potentially be negative about it. So I was sitting in class earlier today, and one of the students in the class, I guess she's a mother of like a kid who's about that age, and she was saying that schools are actually like implementing like board game hour. So like the kids can play like a board game and like have like a social interaction and
Yeah.
like look at the other kids in the eyes and stuff like that. And because I guess like what you were saying about like social media, um, that it sort of detracts from a person's ability to engage in like interactions or in real life, or IRL, or whatever you wanna call it.
Right.
Yeah, but that was just a interesting concept that I thought of as you said that.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so let me think here. How do you think the experience? Um, I mean, yeah, like what you were saying. I mean, this kind of almost bounces like off of one of my questions. Like the MRI technology, kind of that bit that they were talking about in the documentary, where they're like mapping the adolescent brain and like seeing where the different parts that were like, or like neuronal connections and things that were firing. Um, and then also while they were doing that, they would like show the picture of a person's face,
Yep.
and like the adolescents would mistake um, what was it? I think it was like fear or something like that, or
Yeah.
anger. They'd mistake fear for anger,
Yeah.
which is kind of embarrassing because like as they were showing it, I was like, oh, like they're shocked or surprised or something, and then they were like, no. I was like, oh, guess, guess my brain hasn't developed fully. Um,
Right.
yeah, but like I mean, just in terms of like the sort of technological advances that have been made, that sort of psychologists and scientists and stuff can like sort of see the different aspects of like how an adolescent brain is actually developing, and things like that. I think that that will be able to um, yeah, help sort of get a better idea as to what the adolescent brain is sort of going through, so you can get a better general concept of how to deal with that sort of stage of life. So yeah, I would say it would be better in that sense, but like you were saying with certain other technologies that kind of detract from the positive aspects of things. Uh,
Right. And one thing that just kind of popped into my mind going off of that, as I have a football game on in the background here, and thinking about concussions with football players, you could almost argue it's a synonymous argument here, where the experience of football players is they're trying to make it better by putting research into brain injuries and CTE. And as this information comes out, they're then making changes and adjustments to make the football experience a healthier and a safer one. So I think that goes kind of hand in hand with our discussion here, that as new findings and new studies are coming out about the adolescent brain, we can then use those studies to make the experience more beneficial and overall better for them. So just an interesting comparison there that kind of popped into my mind.
yeah, yeah. No, it's kind of like interesting how the stuff that we're actually going over in this class like can be linked back to like multiple other aspects of life. Um, okay, so I guess at this point we should probably, before we jump into our own questions, maybe we should go over the creative responses that we did.
Sure.
Um, okay, so trying to remember what I did mine on. I think I did mine on like the Piaget's theory of like the different stages of development. Can't remember exactly what the adolescent stage is called off the top of my head right now, but I kind of wrote mine in like the effect of, there was one quote that said something to the effect of Piaget discovered that like adolescents have a higher sort of priority on like justice and things of that nature. Um, so like one of the things that we could do in that creative response was to sort of link a video to it.
Hmm.
Um, So what I did is I took David Hogg. I don't know if you know who David Hogg is. He was one of the kids at the Parkland shooting, like
Okay, yeah.
that like big school shooting in Florida. So he's been in the news, sort of trying to enact like I guess you would call them common sense gun laws. So I just put a video of him like basically stating his case and everything, and then linked it back to the reading that we had to do about how like I believe the quote was something to the effect of kids like adolescent kids have more of a sense of justice, and like adults are more prone to I think it was like they were more prone to uh, like just sort of leaving things as they are as long as it didn't affect them.
Right.
Um, yeah, so basically that was like kind of the gist of my creative response. Um,
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I do remember from the either the reading or the video, it all kind of blends together sometimes. But they did say, you know, that the youth have been at the forefront of just about every social justice movement. That's not something that you really think about, but you know, you think back to, I mean, even the civil rights movement in the 50s, like Martin Luther King was a pretty young guy
yeah,
leading this charge that, you know, turned into a, you know, potentially the biggest change in history. You know, and now you look at the Black Lives Matter movement and, you know, things of that matter, and right at the forefront is all younger people, and especially with this gun control stuff, and the school shootings. These are, you know, kids who were directly impacted by it that are now trying to make a change. So it's really interesting.
yeah, yeah,
So with mine, you know, a lot of times, you know, the general gist of the documentary and you know, it seems to be that there's a lot of stress on adolescents, whether it be coming from school, athletics, um, parents being a little overbearing. You know, there's a lot of stress that comes on to younger people, and I related mine back to a TED talk that I watched not too long ago about stress and how we, you know, how stress doesn't always have to be a bad thing. You know, on the surface, it appears to be a negative phenomenon per se, but you know, it's really about how we interpret it and how a lot of times if we're stressed, um, it means that we have a lot of things going on in our life, and you know, a lot of times stress comes from a lot of good things that are happening. I mean, I can kind of speak for myself here and say that, you know, I'm a little stressed out. I have school, I have a couple of coaching jobs, I have a lot going on. So it's a little bit stressful, but at the same time, it's all from positive influences in my life. So
mhm,
it's really about you know, our interpretation of stress and how we look at it. And I think that's an important thing for adolescents to remember, and an important tool that they can use to make things seem easier and to help them, you know, stay calm while they're going through what may seem like a difficult stage in their life.
yeah, yeah. I mean, oh, sorry, were you still going?
Yeah, no, I'm all set.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, well, sort of going off of that sort of concept. I mean, like, there's multiple sort of studies that also say that like it's good to have certain amounts of stress. Like, I mean, you obviously don't want to be like stressed to the point of like just complete breakdown, but like for school, if you're stressed, like you actually I'm pretty sure like certain studies have shown that like if you're stressed, you actually perform better. And like I mean, that's like going off of sports, like training for sports is pretty much just putting your body under constant stress to like prepare yourself for the actual game that you're attempting to play. So I mean, um, yeah, I guess like in terms of adolescence, it's like almost better to learn how to sort of cope with that stress then. while your brain's sort of like maturing, like what the video was saying about how like pruning. So if certain connections aren't used, they end up just falling away. And then if certain other neuronal connections are constantly used, then they sort of get stronger and things of that nature. So like it's almost better as an adolescent to sort of learn how to cope with that stress, I would imagine, because then you would actually form neuronal connections that would like sort of help you deal with that kind of stress further on in your life.
Yeah, for sure. That's an interesting point. All right, so do you want to move into our questions now?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. You want to start with yours?
Yeah, all right. I almost read the professor's question again. Okay, so yeah, I feel like a lot of the responses that I said have to do with my actual questions. So, one question was, what does Piaget's theory of development add to the concept of adolescence?
Yeah. So, I mean, just to confirm the understanding here. So Piaget seemed to be more focused on cognitive and the logical aspects of growth rather than the emotional side of growth, like Freud and Eric Erikson were. So, a lot of what Piaget argues is that we're born with the predisposition to organize our thoughts. Um, and going off of that, developed a few different stages, which are the sensory motor stage or the object permanence stage. And then there's the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage. And each stage is kind of a different stage of development. But ultimately, his theory in general says that the thought process of teenagers is the pinnacle of human thinking. And that a lot of time teenagers are thinking and working towards achieving this ideal world. And that's going back to what you were talking about before, how the youth are at the forefront of these social movements. Like you said, teenagers are the ones coming up with these ideas and setting these ideas forward. And it's really interesting that Piaget noticed that and was able to run with that idea and that theory. And I think in general, his studies and his theories give an awful amount of credit to adolescents. And it kind of gives them the benefit of the doubt, whereas other studies and other psychologists, don't want to give that credit to the adolescents as readily as Piaget did.
Well, if I like, I mean, if I remember correctly, I think like Piaget was coming up with his theories because he was like watching his son, like as his son was growing up, he was kind of like keeping track of like the various different things that like he would notice that his son started to do as he kind of like um yeah, and also yeah, you actually had all of the stages there. I forgot to write them all down. But another interesting concept that I sort of noticed from Piaget's theory was that like adolescence is when the kids start to like sort of be able to think in like abstract terms. So like they can start then thinking about pretty much all of the stuff that we learned in the videos, and like they can start thinking about how like language is a social construct and how the thumbs up thing is a construct and all that stuff. Um, so that's just like a relatively interesting little tidbit that I sort of picked up off of that.
Yeah, for sure. So if you don't have anything else to add, then I can ask one of my questions here, which, hold on, let me pull it up here. I just want to make sure I get it right. So, this kind of relates to one of the professor questions that we were prompted on, but the documentary that we watched was recorded and it aired back in 2002. So her question was kind of leaning towards, in the future, how do we think the experience will be? But my question is kind of, since that video came out, what do you think has changed in adolescence? So from say 2002 to 2018, has anything changed, or in your personal experience, um, have you noticed any differences from that video?
I mean, like in terms of, well, I mean, granted, actually, in 2002, that's when I graduated from elementary school, so that's kind of weird. But so pretty much, I mean, since like between 2002 and now, just going back off of what we were talking about earlier with like the social media and everything of that nature, that I'm pretty sure within that span, that's when all of that came to
Yeah,
being.
for sure.
Uh, yeah, and it's basically additionally, so like 2002, that video was made, and they were big on the MRI in that video. But I'm not overly positive. I would imagine that within that 20-year span or whatever it is, that they probably have created like I guess more detailed sort of brain mapping machines and things of that nature. So even compared to the video that we watched, there's probably an even more in-depth sort of map
Yeah.
of the brain that we can sort of run with. Um, Unfortunately, I don't know exactly like what kind of technology they have in that sense, but I I imagine that there is probably a lot more a lot more that we know now than we did then.
Yeah, and, and I think, kind of going off of that, I think the adolescent experience has changed a little bit too. Going back to what we talked about with technology and social media, I mean, I got a cell phone when I was in, I think, seventh or eighth grade, and now that's starting to change. You're starting to see kids with cell phones in fourth, sixth grade.
Yeah,
Uh, so
earlier.
it's kind of interesting just seeing the time periods of when things are happening for adolescence is changing as well. But I also think that uh, parenting has gotten a little less tight and a little less strict.
Mm.
Um, you know, uh, I think kids do have a little bit more freedom now, and I think parents are a little more comfortable now than when that video was recorded. I don't necessarily have a factor, a study to back that up. That's just basically off of my experience and what I've seen. But I would say that between the technology and a slight loosening up, the experience is definitely a little different than it was back when that video was made in 2002.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, so
Yeah, if you want to go on to your second question.
yeah. All right, so my second question kind of in a way ties into the past couple of questions. I guess I probably should become a little bit more spontaneous on these. Um, so it's what does modern technology show us about differences between adolescent and mature brains? So I feel like we've kind of already.
Right. So I think the main thing which we touched on a little bit before, with that MRI technology, in the study where they showed the different faces which were expressing fear, but some of the adolescents interpreted it as expressing anger. I think it just showed that um, adolescents use a different portion of the brain when trying to express or when trying to identify emotions. I think in the reading it said that the children and the adolescents activated a more primitive emotional area of the brain, while adults use their frontal cortex, which is known as the more rational part of the brain. So that, and I think that kind of shows the difference in adolescents and adults, in the sense that adults are jumping to these, the rational understandings of things, while children are using, the more emotional side of things. And it leads to, that disconnect. And I think that's where we see, teenagers and parents not getting along, or teenagers and parents arguing, because, we're activating different areas of our brain, and, it leads to misunderstandings. Um, Something else that was discussed, I think, in the reading, uh, when it said that teenagers are more likely to partake in risky behaviors than adults. And, a lot of adults and people may say, like, oh, teenagers are always up to no good. They're always causing problems. They're always taking risks. And, those cliche, stereotypical things.
Yeah.
But I found it very interesting that it said, there's actually an increased need in teenagers to satisfy the dopamine reward centers. And that's done by achieving risky tasks. So again, another difference there between the teenage brain and the adult brain. So those are basically the things that I found interesting pertaining to that specific question.
Yeah, I mean, also like another thing that I sort of like just thought of is for the most part, like the brain kind of stops developing and things of that nature at like 25, I think it is, something like that.
Right.
So yeah, like the teenage brain, like I guess like sort of like the teenage body is a lot more has a lot more plasticity, like with that pruning concept and everything of that nature. So there's like more neurons kind of working in a an adolescent brain as compared to an adult brain, which has already sort of, in a way, I guess, figured out where they're going. Yeah. So all right. Yeah. Cool.
And just to add on to that a little bit as well, what was I going to say? It talked about in the reading how, teenagers start to go through puberty and bodily changes, at the age of 12, 13, 14, but our brains, aren't ready to handle those responsibilities. So physically, you're able to have a child at, say, age 13,
Yeah.
but, mentally, you're not ready to actually handle that responsibility. So there's a lot of things going on in that teenage mind where our body is, ready for one thing, but, we're not even close as human beings as being able to, support what may come of that. So I thought that that was interesting as well.
Yeah. 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 That was a good point. All right.
So I guess on to my uh, last question here. I was talking about. I was really intrigued in the documentary when they were discussing sleep. So my question was, the video says that a good night's sleep can be very effective and can lead to better concentration and ultimately better results on tests or whatever it may be that you're doing the next day. So I was just kind of wondering if you've personally experienced that, and some of your thoughts on sleep and the studies that have been found about sleep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely agree with the fact that like not getting a good night's sleep is obviously detrimental to sort of uh, cranial function and things of that nature. Not sure if that's an actual statement, cranial function, but whatever. Let's keep
It
going.
is now.
Yeah, but I mean, like, just from my own personal experience, I don't really have like too much knowledge in terms of like what it would do for like adolescent test scores and things like that. But just based off of personal experience, I have sleep apnea. So like basically what happens is like my windpipe like basically closes, like, and then when you're breathing at night, it doesn't fully open. It just kind of like flaps around. So like there would be periods of time in the night where I would like try and take a breath and absolutely nothing would go in. So then you just sort of stop breathing for like a second. And
Wake up.
yeah, well, like not like fully wake up. You wouldn't like fully wake up. It's more like you just never are able to sort of fall into that like REM sleep. And
Okay.
because you can't fall into REM sleep, you're never actually getting like a decent nice night's rest. So then you wake up the next morning and you're just like aggravated. Yeah, so like I noticed that well
I, I
oh
remember in the video it was saying that, if you don't get enough sleep in that REM period, then your brain isn't going through the memory process and it's not storing information, because we actually, when we enter that REM stage, where that's when we're learning and that's when we're storing things into our memory. So if you're not entering that stage, then you're not going to be as sharp.
mhm.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I mean just like basing like adolescence when you're like when your brain is still forming, um if you aren't getting a proper sort of night of REM sleep, I can definitely see how that would like affect a child's ability to sort of perform in the classroom the next day. Just based on like I would uh I would wake up and just be like real mad for no reason, like just wandering around, just being like aggravated about everything.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so like a forming brain is definitely going to have negative sort of side effects from something like that.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, so sometimes I would use the whole, oh, a good night's sleep is super important. So I would just blow off studying or something and just take the sleep. And I found that that's not as effective. You definitely still have to study and put the information into your head. Um, but I think that the studies are there to show that if you stay up all night just trying to study, you're never actually going to store and learn that information. So I think finding the right balance and combination between study and preparation, and combining that with a good night's sleep is when you're going to be the most effective at no matter what you're doing, whether it be sports, going to work the next day, and as far as adolescents go in the classroom.
Mhm.
So I was really intrigued by the sleep aspect of that video.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, no, I don't really have anything to add. I think I got most of my sob story in there. Um,
So I mean, I guess now, just in general, if there's anything else that you found interesting or anything else that you wanted to bring up from the reading or through the videos, I guess we can just kind of talk about that for a second. If you have anything else, or if not, then I guess we're all set, right?
what do you mean, Greg? I found the whole thing interesting.
Yes, of course. Um, one thing that I just wanted to touch on, um, that I thought was really interesting is that the video said that we go through a very similar transformation in early childhood that we go through again in adolescence. So
Yeah,
our
right when you're born, I think it was.
yeah, our brain goes through this thing, in the first 0 to 2 years of our life, and then it kind of rests, and then it goes back through that same process when we enter adolescence. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But other than that, I think we touched on a lot and covered a lot of points.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I think we did pretty well for being a two-person group.
yeah, the two-man dream team here.
All
So
right.
do you know how to log it off and make sure that we're all set?
Yep. Hang on. I'm going to stop the broadcast now.